Hello everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to part 2 of my level 60 Bard videos. In part 1, we discussed what the new abilities were, some changes to the old abilities, and what my thoughts on them were. So if you're interested in all that, check out the annotations in the top right hand of the video and it'll take you over there. This video, we're going to be talking about one of the many potential Bard openers. We're going to be talking about the priority system for all of your abilities, how to know when to use what, and some general tips and tricks for newer Bards out there. Now, let's get right into that. This opener, I'm not going to say it's the be-all end-all opener. Heck, I didn't even come up with this opener. Credit to Coldy and Sardigan. They had been playing with the job for several weeks before me. They had very quickly figured out the new one once the Wanderer's Minuet changes were made. So I've been going with that since I hit level 60. Thank you guys. I'm going to be sharing that opener in this video. Now, this opener, and I think all openers out there, have a lot of weaving of buffs. There's a lot of things you need to press in order to get your initial burst out in an efficient manner. So, let's just get into it. Now, we're actually going to be starting without Wanderer's Minuet in the opener, but don't worry, we're going to turn it on very shortly into the fight. Don't worry. So, same standard things for a Bard opener. You still want to cast foes before the fight starts. If you have magic damage, you battle voice it as usual. This is, of course, tentative depending on the fight, where battle voice may be better saved for another 10 to 15 seconds into the fight. Wanderer's Peen is also something you have to start considering in your opener, but this needs to be worked out with your warrior. If your warrior is not using Berserk within the first 1 or 2 global cooldowns of the fight, then it's probably going to pan out not working out exactly the way you want. I believe the triple fell cleave has them use it after the 3rd or 4th global cooldown, maybe even later. So it really depends on that. It's only a 30-second buff, so if they don't use, it's a 20-second berserk timer, so work it out with your warrior. It's something you should be considering in your opener. And of course, Quelling Strikes, this should be pretty much before you start popping any of your other major buffs as well. All these things need to neatly fit between like the first 6 or 7 seconds of a 10-second pull macro. Now, when it comes to actual combat effective buffs, the opener that I've been using, that I already credited to Sardigan and Coldy, Hawk's Eye, Blood for Blood, Internal Release, Bloodletter. Your Bloodletter should be hitting right as the boss is pulled. So it's very, very interesting to time. It's really hard to do in pugs, but in organized group content, it tends to work out very, very simply. Then you go into Straight Shot, your first global cooldown. Then Wanderer's Minuet and Raging Strikes. This is where you turn it on right before you start applying your dots. So now you have your fully buffed Wind Bite minus the X potion. Then, between Wind Bite and Venomous Bite, you have your X potion of Dexterity. Of course, if you're rich and you're buying Draconian potions, I wouldn't use them in all your content just yet because they're pretty expensive. But if you're looking for the most DPS, make sure you're popping a stat potion of some sort. If you can't afford Draconian potions, go with the X potions. Then, after Venomous Bite, you have Barrage, Imperial Arrow. And this is where things get complicated and reactionary as in the Bard opener. You can fit 2 Bloodletters in your Bard opener comfortably, even with the global cooldowns coming up. So if you got a Bloodletter proc right after this Imperial Arrow, hit it. Then hit Heavy Shot. And we're going to talk about that rule a little bit later on. Then Sidewinder, Heavy Shot. Again, if you got a Bloodletter proc, hit it. You can only do 2 maximum here, though, so be very careful. Then Flaming Arrow, Heavy Shot, Repelling Shot, Straight Shot, Blunt Arrow, Iron Jaws. That should be enough time to reapply quickly enough. Now, I've had to wing this and change it so many times. Every time I do the opener, it ends up coming out a little bit differently. But the priorities are the same. Have some fully buffed dots, have fully buffed Imperial Arrow, fully buffed Sidewinder, fully buffed Flaming Arrow, and then just try to weave everything. If Bloodletters start coming up when you're trying to do Blunt Arrow and Repelling Shot, prioritize the Bloodletters over them. You can't just sit there spamming your next off the global cooldown ability anymore, since you can only fit one of them in between. If a Bloodletter comes up, you need to be ready to hit that over your other abilities. It is a massive DPS increase when it comes to looking at the potencies of it. So after that, it's pretty much just maintain Straight Shot, maintain Iron Jaws, maintain your buffs whenever they come up, and keep using Heavy Shot, keep weaving all of these abilities in, and we'll talk about the actual priority system in a second here. So I'm probably going to mess this up, even if I do, whatever. I have it written down in the document for you guys. Just check the description of the video. So let's do this. I'm just going to mute myself so you don't hear me breathing hard while I'm doing it. Like, Alright, I think that's enough of a showcase. So, that actually went fairly smoothly. We had a few procs in there, but everything ended up lining up well. So if you do that correctly, you get your fully buffed dots, you get your fully buffed burst damage, and you also get the reapplication of Iron Jaws with Raging Strikes on. So it ends up working out over the long term of the fight. Your buffs tend to line up pretty well with this opener, so that when Barrage, Imperial Arrow comes up, when Iron Jaws are coming up, at least one buff becomes available, if not two buffs become available, during most of your other major cooldowns for the rest of the fight. So it takes a lot of practice to get that down. It's a lot of reaction. It's definitely a lot more complicated than the old Bard opener was. And you saw there were times in there where I would say there was improper Bloodletter usage. It's so much about how quickly you're able to react to those Bloodletter procs coming up. Of course, if you're in an AoE situation and you just wanted to practice that opener, if you have two targets available to you, you would instead be hitting Rain of Death instead of Bloodletter. But assuming a single target, Bloodletter will be where you go with there. So in terms of knowing when to use what and what's appropriate outside of your opener, it's great. If you could do a good opener with big burst, great. That does not mean your DPS is going to be good for the rest of the fight. You need to understand the way that the abilities interact with each other and when to use them. So your top priority, just like in A Realm Reborn, straight shot. Your second priority is your dots. Now, luckily, after you've applied your dots for the first time, or if you ever need to reapply them because the boss jumped and went invincible or something like that, Iron Jaws. So, straight shot, your dots, and then Iron Jaws are your top three priorities as a bard. And then after that, it's pretty much all about where your off the global cooldowns go. Sidewinder is your hardest hitting ability on its own, as long as both dots are up. Never use Sidewinder while... If you don't have both dots up, don't use Sidewinder. Bottom line. It's just like Fester for summoners. After that, you have Imperial Arrow. Now, Barrage Imperial Arrow is debatably a better thing to pop before Sidewinder, but because Sidewinder is instant and it fits in between the global cooldown, they don't usually line up in such a way that you have to make that choice, especially with the Barrage cooldown the way it is. It may happen occasionally in the fight, including boss jumps or target switching or things like that, but generally Sidewinder is a priority over Imperial Arrow. Straighter shot procs, also high of importance. They're way above importance pretty much for everything. After Iron Jaws in terms of global cooldown usage, it would be straighter shot. Then you're looking at all your other hard-hitting abilities, the ones from A Realm Reborn, and those you just go based on the potencies. Laying down a Flaming Arrow is important. Making sure you're hitting your Misery's End under 20% is important. Bloodletter procs, now these have become a lot more interesting. I've already mentioned it. It's actually beneficial to hit a Bloodletter proc even if Heavy Shot is available. Bloodletter and Heavy Shot are both the same potency, and yes, Heavy Shot does have the chance to grant you it gives you the 20% chance for a straighter shot proc. However, Bloodletter resets are so difficult to fit in the rotation. The fact that it's the same potency and there's a chance for a reset means that if you ever need to hit two abilities in the same off the global cooldown, even though you can only fit one, it'll mostly be because you need to hit a Bloodletter. Like, for example, right here. Let's say I only have internal release. It's coming up and I want to hit it. This would be the optimal thing to do. Instead of doing this and then popping internal release next because I got the Bloodletter proc, or just popping internal release and then popping Bloodletter on the next off the global cooldown, weave them both in. Just make sure you're doing Bloodletter second. So here you go. So it would be more along the lines of this. Straight shot, there. And there you go. Now keep in mind that's only the case if we're talking about Heavy Shot. If it's a straighter shot proc, hit the straighter shot proc before hitting your Bloodletter. It's very important that you only do that where you prioritize Bloodletter over your global cooldown if it's in reference to Heavy Shot. It's very, very important. Now, there may be other opportunities where you may want to consider doing some other things, but it's going to be up to you to kind of figure those ones out. Heavy Shot is your last priority when it comes to almost everything. It's just a filler ability. It's more about maintaining everything else. So it's your lowest priority global cooldown skill. And then below that is Repelling Shot and Blunt Arrow, because Repelling Shot 80 potency, Blunt Arrow 50, Bloodletter proc's more important, Misery's End, Flaming Arrow, all those other hard-hitting abilities, far more important. So, again, put a document in the description of the video to give you some rough idea of what I just said. It's very, very hard to explain out loud because there are just so many abilities that the Bard has to prioritize here. Now, we've gone over the opener, we've gone over the priority system. What about general tips? Because just because we have all these abilities and you now know them, there are situations that you may find yourself in that make the job just feel clunky at times. And we're going to be going over those and ways around them. Probably the biggest thing people ask is dealing with movement in fights. And as with the new Bard, Minuet while it doesn't need to be up 100% of the time, if you can stand still or have very, very limited movement, you should have it up as much as possible. So, how do you manage getting towards the boss for things like Repelling Shot or just sidestepping small mechanics? And the biggest answer and the easiest thing to say is, we have a 1 second cast time, and then we have a 1.5 second cast time, and then about a second of movement where we can, as you can see, just move towards or move away. Like, oh, I know I need to be over to the left of mine in a few seconds, so let me start moving over there in between my global cooldowns. Of course, straighter shot procs give you much enhanced mobility, you know, a full global cooldown's worth of mobility. So if you need to utilize those for that as well. Now, another thing that you can do is, of course, turn Minuet off. I mentioned this in the last video, but this is a tip that I really have to nail home because I am going to show you how to have a little bit more enhanced mobility in Wanderer's Minuet itself. The mechanic you're going to be dodging for like 5 seconds, don't just sit there with Minuet on, not doing anything, or just using your off the global cooldowns. Turn it off and just do the mechanic like this, and then as soon as you can stop, just turn it back on, and then stop moving. Now, if you're looking for mobility while in Minuet, there is one thing you can do to save yourself a global cooldown, and that is Feint. Now, Feint is one of our cross-class abilities, which I should probably talk about a little bit as well, even though they really haven't changed since A Realm Reborn. Now, because Feint is not an archer or bard weapon skill, it does not suffer a cast time from Wanderer's Minuet. So even with Minuet on, you can cast it on the move. Now, this has to be done in a very limited fashion. Do not, if you need to move for 5 or 6 seconds straight, do not do this, unless, of course, you just turn Minuet on, which would be a mistiming on your part, and you can't turn it off. Because there are, while it is great that it can be used on the move, it has several drawbacks. One, it is, as someone in my chat called it, a TP vampire. At 80 TP per use, you are burning through your TP every time you have to use, every time you have to use Feint. So you do not want to have to move for 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds and be spamming Feint the whole time. Feint should be used once. If you ever need to cast more than one Feint, you probably should have just turned Minuet off. All you're supposed to do is just, if it's like, okay, I need to move like for the next 2 seconds. For one global cooldown, I'm going to be moving. So I would be like, Feint, alright, stop. You should never have to use Feint more than that. That should be your limit. But it is an option if you want to still be able to do some minor amounts of damage while moving with Minuet on. I recommend learning the fights as well as possible and learning when to use Feint, if at all, in an encounter. Be very, very careful with it. So, what are some other clunky things that can happen on the Bard? Well, a big one is Repelling Shot. So, Repelling Shot has a nasty habit of occasionally interrupting your casts if you try to cast too quickly after using it. Let's see, sometimes I get this, sometimes it works in my favor. Let's try this right here, see if I can get a good example. Okay, that was not a good example. If you have really low latency, that probably won't happen to you, the whole interrupting after Repelling Shot thing. I'm going to wait 30 seconds and try it again, but there is the occasional issue where after a Repelling Shot, you'll go to use some sort of ability with a cast time, and it will be interrupted. So you generally want to wait till your character is cemented on the ground before you hit the next ability that you're going to want to hit. I, again, don't know if I'm going to be getting any sort of luck with this one. Let's just see it without anything else. Now, I'm getting good latency in here. Kurt, this is probably not a place where we'll see that happen. So just know that it can happen. I'm sure you'll see it at some point or another. Another thing is Sidewinder. Never Sidewinder directly after an application, a direct application of either Wind Bite or Venomous Bite. Now, if it's just after Iron Jaws and your dots have been up the whole time, that's fine. But if you try doing Sidewinder right after a Venomous Bite cast, for example, it's not going to benefit from the full potency. You saw how my Sidewinder only did about 1100 damage there. It's the same thing that happens with Summoner Fester. If you cast it too quickly after hard casting one of your dots, specifically Bio is the one that most people go with, then the dot takes an extra half a second to apply, and in that time, Sidewinder is going to hit before it's actually registered server side. So, another tip that should help you out. Looking through my list right here, there aren't too many other real tips that I can give to you. Peen, I've already given you tips on when it comes to the Warrior Berserk. If you know a Warrior is going to be berserking sometime soon, if there's a downtime where the boss isn't attacking you and you can't attack the boss or anything like that, and you know your warrior is going to berserk when the boss becomes available again, that's a good time to peen, as long as you it doesn't hinder your movement in any sort of way. And other than that, I feel like there's definitely one that I'm missing. Hey, sorry for the cut-in. I finished recording and realized I knew what the two things that I forgot were when it came to tips, so I want to include them. One of them is Flaming Arrow. Now, Flaming Arrow cannot be queued while we are using Wanderer's Minuet, so if you press it while you're in the middle of the cast, it doesn't queue up. Normally, if you had done that back in A Realm Reborn and you hit it as you were hitting your ability, it would at least pop up on the ground. In order to properly place Flaming Arrow now, you need to wait until the cast time is finished and then press the button. Now, I know that seems self-explanatory to a lot of people, but this game has a system that allows you to queue abilities 0.5 seconds in advance before they actually are able to be used. Unfortunately, with the cast time, there is no queuing when it comes to abilities, so you need to be very careful. If it's before the cast time finishes, won't work. Even if it was actually like 0.12, has to be as soon as the cast bar disappears in order to place it properly. Now, the other tip I mentioned in my original video, the part 1 of this video that I mentioned at the beginning, but I want to re-mention it here since I'm not going to ask everyone to go find it in that video. So, and that is regarding Iron Jaws and the reapplication of dots. Now, Iron Jaws is probably the most responsive ability in the game, in that it is very easily able to reapply our dots, even if it seems like they're going to fall off. So, you're going to see Wind Bite here is ticking down. I'm going to Iron Jaws it when it gets really, really close to falling off. And unlike a lot of other abilities in the game, it's going to respond. Watch this. See how Wind Bite fell off and I still reapplied it with Iron Jaws? The rule of thumb is if you finish the cast time for Iron Jaws and the dot is still ticking server side, then it will reapply it. Even if it looks like it should have fallen off, you can reapply it and it looks beautiful when you do it. There, I just did it again. Both of the dots that time. So it's going to take some practice knowing exactly with your latency how much leeway you actually have with Iron Jaws. I don't know why I'm running around. But those are the two tips I wanted to forget, so I'm going to cut back into the original recording of the video now. So if anybody else has any tips for the sort of more clunkiness of the Bard, be sure to leave it in the comment section of the video below. Also, if you have any varieties on the opener, I've seen at least 6 different openers, and yes, I have actually tested them all. And the results are almost exactly the same, depending on the variance of crit chance versus bloodletter procs. So, like I said, I'm not going to say this is the be-all, end-all opener. Some people might say that. Some people might say another one's the best. Pick the one that you like the most and see the best results with. Test your different openers. Get the ones that are best for your results, for your latency, all that fun stuff. Let me know what you thought of this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share to get more Final Fantasy XIV videos. We have the other jobs coming up at level 60 soon enough. And don't forget, Alexander Savage, when that comes out, we will have guides for that on this channel as well. Thank you for watching. I will see you guys next time. And until then, take care.